Welcome to the Boat Dealer Profits Podcast. I am your host, Matt Sellhorst, the creator of the Splash System, founder of Boat Dealer Profits and Boat Dealer Profits marketing agency, where we're committed to helping family owned boat dealerships sell more boats, make more money, and have more fun. So, this episode, I wanted to do something a little bit different. We've had some great guests on. I've done some solo episodes where I talk about different topics, give my opinion, give my expert advice, go into details. And I came across a podcast from a guy that you may know. His name is Jocko Willink. He is a retired Navy SEAL. I would say the most popular thing he's known for is a YouTube video that has gone around the internet where he talks about the the one of the things that you should do. This was in a commencement speech at, I believe it was his alma mater. I'm not even sure, but he said one thing you should do is make your bed every day, and it was basically, hey, start out with a win and move on from there. I actually discovered him on the Tim Ferriss podcast, which is a interesting podcast that's very eclectic, has it goes all different directions, and the Joe Rogan podcast, which is Joe Rogan is a comedian into MMA and UFC, which I am not at all, but I heard him on there, and there was something I came across his latest book that is called Extreme Ownership, and I said, you know what, I need to check this guy out some more. I really was into his message. It's a message that I needed at the time. He talks a lot about discipline. He talks a lot about just do it anyway. Being a Navy SEAL, obviously he walks his talk. He's big into physical fitness. I just bought a couple books for my daughters. He has two children's books out called The Warrior Way, teaching kids about healthy lifestyle, discipline, working hard, dealing with other personalities, how to be a good leader, all the things that I think are important for my girls to know. So even at 4.5 and 7, so I got my oldest one that book, and that is on her reading list for this summer. So the reason I tell you that is one of the things Jocko did on his podcast as I started listening to it. I always go back when I listen to a podcast, and I encourage you to do the same, especially with this one if you haven't just stumbled across it, is to go back and listen to the first handful of episodes. One, it gets you a sense of what the podcast really was started about. It gets you a sense of their real personality before they become more polished. And yes, there's going to be more ums and ahs, and it won't be as probably well produced, but you really get a better sense of the person before they hit the big time, or before it got to, in his case, I think he's 3 or 4 years into his podcast. And one of the things that he's done in his early ones is he's pulled out some of his favorite books. In his case, they are battlefield books, books by soldiers. The Art of War is one he did recently that I listened to, and I'm like, that is a really cool idea. So I went to my bookshelf, and to change it up a little bit, I decided to do that. Went to my bookshelf and pulled out what I would say is one of the questions Tim Ferriss asks on his podcast is, what book have you gifted more than any other? What's very informative in that question is highly successful people tend to give books. Books are a big part of their life. Learning and continuous learning is a big part of their life. One of the books that I gift frequently to clients is, and if you're listening to this and you're a splash dealer, you're one of my clients, you likely have received a copy of this book. It's called Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion by Dr. Robert Cialdini. Now, Dr. Cialdini wrote this book back in 1984, I believe, is the edition I have. He has updated it. Let's see, 1984, 1994, 2007 are the copyright dates, and he also came out with several years ago a new book called Persuasion, Presuasion, and it is kind of building on the concepts he talks about in Influence. He adds a little bit, and he updates some of the stories a little bit, and goes a little deeper into some of the concepts. But what's interesting about this book, and why I wanted to review it on the podcast today and kind of give you what you may consider the cliff notes of the book. In college, we had in our area, the Midwest, we had cliff notes, which were the shortened version. You didn't have to read the whole book. You read the cliff notes, you got the gist of it. You could get a D on the test. It was kind of the lazy man's way. So I'm going to give you that here today, but I'm also going to translate it into boating industry world. So there in the book, he talks about influence as a research scientist. So my wife is a PhD. She has her doctorate and she's a professor and she does a lot of research for her work. It's part of the academic world is to do research. And what I love about is he applies the same scientifically rigorous requirements of research to psychology and specifically influence psychology. So he calls it compliance in the book because he didn't write this in 1984 as a book for marketing and salespeople, which it is ultimately turned into. He wrote it from a psychologist's point of view for the layperson to say, hey, watch out for these things. These are things that people are doing to influence you, and con men are using these things. So you need to be very, very cautious of it and aware of it. Hence his use of the word compliance. But he also goes back and looks at research that are held up to these rigorous standards. And it's not just here's what we think is happening, here's what is happening. It's actually here's what's been proven to happen in these research experiments and done repeatedly, and that meet the rigor of this research world that encompasses even scientific research. My wife is an exercise scientist and human physiology, so she does body mass index and all sorts of stuff. And the same rigorous standards apply where it has to be very detailed. It has to be approved by a board. It has to have very strict statistical guidelines for anything to be published, which most of the studies that he references have been published, including his own. So it's very factual. And if you've heard me speak, if you've been to any of my talks, I have likely referenced this book because it is a foundational component of the way I look at sales and marketing, and you'll see why as we go through. So let's start. He starts the book with a story about he uses a lot of nature. So what happens in nature? He tells a story about a turkey that when the male turkey comes into a flock or whatever they call it, there are certain sounds that they make that will let other male turkeys know that hey, they're there and they're there for the female turkeys. So when a tom turkey walks in, he makes this gobbling sound, and the other turkeys know that okay, this is what it means, and this is my reaction. He calls it the click whir reaction. So it's like a tape recorder where you see the stimulus. That's the click, hit the play button. Whir is the tape recorder going off, and you play whatever is ingrained in you from a very young age as your reaction. So with these turkeys, it was male turkey walks in, shows these signs, click. The whir reaction is the other turkeys get aggressive and they do their natural reaction, and that's the click whir response. So you'll hear me reference that several times. But what they found is it doesn't have to be an actual turkey. They can put a stuffed animal in there, and as long as they play the right sound, that reaction is exactly the same. Doesn't matter what it is. So his premise of the book is hey, there are things that humans do, and I'm going to back this up with science because I'm going to do research studies in his own research department, and he's also referencing and done research on other studies that have been done in the past. So this was the 1984 edition. Some of the one of the stories talks about a 10 cents Coke that Coke out of the vending machine that he got for 10 cents in this one study. So it's the information is dated but relevant. So stick with the points. And the first chapter he calls weapons of influence. So you can see this is not written as some marketing person that's trying to convince you of their marketing and sales techniques. That's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He's writing this and saying, hey, here are some things that work. You need to be aware of them as the general public that they do work, and you need to be cognizant of that click whir effect. Now, as a marketer, we know, hey, our job is to sell and to market, in our case, boats, our services in the boating industry, and that quick whir reaction can be used to our advantage. Now, over time, Dr. Cialniti's book has gotten into the sales and marketing community. He has embraced that, and his latest book and some of his newer editions kind of go a little bit away from that be careful of this, to use this with the caveat of be honest and ethical, because if you understand that this is how the human brain works, and it's not logic always, but that click whir reaction can have a major influence on things. If you do that and you offer a product that's good for the customer, that is going to give is allows them to make a decision that is going to benefit their life, then it's a good thing to use it in that situation. Because if you don't, somebody on the other side is going to use it that's not going to deliver on the promise and be the con artist type of situation. So that's why in my marketing you'll see for family owned dealerships, for honest and ethical dealerships, because I don't want anybody using this stuff that does not have the best interest of the consumers at heart and does not follow through. And why I have turned away clients, because their Google reviews and their online reviews and what I found about the dealership is not somebody I wanted to work with. And so I've turned business away for that reason as well. And Dr. Cialdini, if you've heard him speak or any interviews with him, he talks about that quite a bit. So we're going to go over I believe there's 7 weapons of influence, as he calls them. 6, reciprocation, the old give and take; commitment and consistency, he calls the hobgoblins of the mind; social proof, truths are us, which if you've heard me speak, social proof is something I talk a lot about; liking, he calls it the friendly thief; authority, directed deference; and scarcity, the rule of a few. So that's where we're going. And we're going to start with reciprocation, where it starts in the book. Now, reciprocation, the story he tells is about a group called the Hare Krishnas. Now, you may recognize that name if you're a little bit older. It's something that I recognize the name, I know the story, but I don't ever remember seeing one in the airports. In the 60s and 70s, there was a religious group called the Hare Krishnas, if you're not aware, that were trying to fundraise. They had a really hard time because they looked funny. Well, just say it. Shaved heads, orange robes, very what would you call them? Peace and love kind of vibe to them. And they weren't able to drum up the donations to get their religion to take in the U.S. Well, they discovered a technique that's based on the reciprocation principle, where if you are old enough, you probably remember they would go to the airports. And what they would do is, instead of just asking for donations, which proved to be very, very ineffective, and the religion wasn't growing, they came up with the strategy to give a little paper flower to somebody in the airport and then ask for a donation. Well, here's how the interaction would go. They would be dressed, bald head, flower on their robe, in sandals, not looking like they belong at the airport at all. Somebody would walk by, they would say, let me give you this flower. No, no, I don't want a flower. No, let me give it to you. No, I don't want it. Yes, here's the flower. And they force it into your hand. And then they would ask for a donation. Well, the principle of reciprocation says that if somebody does something nice for you, that you have to respond in kind. So they would give the flower, and what they found was their donations skyrocketed, and the religion was able to take off and to really grow. Now, since that, airports have changed, the process has changed. They put policies in place even in the 70s to limit access, and over time they dwindled, and now you don't know much about them. But the principle of, I'm going to give you something of virtual no value, because what they found was people would take it, they would give the donation, and then they would throw it away into the trash can. A funny little side note is they would send plainclothes Hare Krishnas around and pick them out of the trash can. They would kind of be positioned by them, and they would grab them all out of the trash can, and then they would reuse them. So they really had a low investment in this little paper flower. Obviously, the people didn't want them, but they still had that obligation to donate. So it worked very well using that reciprocation principle. for donations. You can see it being used in charities now. If you've ever gotten on a mailing list, I donate to a lot of charities. One, because I feel it's important, but two, I like to see what kind of marketing they do. It's research for me, and you'll notice the VA does this a lot. Disabled veterans is they'll send you mailing labels, so that return address labels, and they give that gift to you, knowing that if they give you a gift, you're more likely to donate and donate larger sums. A lot of different ways that it's being used. But the research study that they did was, as most of the research studies that he talks about in the book are kind of undercover research studies. So they say they're studying one thing, but they're actually studying another thing completely. So in this case, they had an art student who was participating in the study, and the study was to see how his providing being kind and giving something, in this case a Coke. So he would go to the Coke machine, and it was 10 cents at the time, so it was a minor. And then at the end, he asked them for their compliance, and the compliance went up significantly. And the compliance was to buy raffle tickets for his art auction. Okay, so what they found was his Coke was 10 cents, but the raffle tickets, on average, the people bought 50 cents worth of raffle tickets. So a 500%, or a five times 500% increase in the dollar amount from the gift, and I'll call it a gift for lack of a better word, of the Coke, to a 50 cents in raffle tickets. Now, what they found is, oh, we want to see if maybe it's because they like him more. Well, he brought them a Coke, so they like him more. And so they did a study where he was not a pleasant person and still did the same things, and they were able to recreate these same type of results in a scientific study. So, what does that mean for you in the boating industry? Well, there are some subtle things that you can do to orchestrate reciprocation throughout the boat buying process and in your boat dealership. The first thing is very simple, is when somebody comes into your dealership, you can offer them something cold to drink. Exactly what the study did is give them something cold to drink. If you have a vending machine, get it out of the vending machine and you give them a cold drink. It's a very small thing, but it starts that almost in our society. It's been ingrained in us. It's that click whir type reaction. It's been ingrained in us that if somebody does something nice for us, we need to do something nice for them. And there were other studies that go into the value doesn't have to be congruent. So it can be a small gift that's going to elicit a large response or large reciprocation. That's the right verb I'm using, but you get the idea. So that's a very simple thing that everybody should do. However, when I mystery shop over and over and over, very, very, very seldom am I offered something cold to drink. It's a very simple one that you can do that's going to start that reciprocation process. Now, a lot of dealers will say, well, we can't give everybody a cold drink. Absolutely, you can. If that's going to increase your chance of making the sale and laying the initial foundation, when you can get a 20 pack of waters for $5, it's short-sighted, but it's just a friendly thing to do, and it works incredibly well. Another, if you want to take it a step further, is when somebody buys a boat from you, you can use a gift strategy to build reciprocation for repeat and referral business. A very simple thing to do, but very, very effective because of that reciprocation principle. If you get to thinking about it a little bit, you can probably come up with scenarios or situations that it's happened to you, and your reaction when if you kind of dissect it a little bit, you can see it was really tied to the initial gift. So an easy way to incorporate that into your business. A lot of other ways that you can do it, but that's just something to get your mind thinking a little bit. And a quote: there's an obligation to give, an obligation to receive, and an obligation to repay. So that's kind of the reciprocation principle really summed up. And in our society, there's an obligation to give, the obligation there to receive. Think that paper flower. No, I don't want it. And ultimately, yes, you'll take it. And then an obligation to repay, even if you didn't want it. So That's the reciprocation principle. It's a great book, and obviously this is the short version. You're going to get a lot more of the nuances if you go through and read the book yourself. So it's like 20 bucks or something on Amazon. I highly encourage it. So number two, commitment and consistency. Now the commitment and consistency piece, the story he talks about is, and I'm going to use this word. It's I'm going to use the story, I should say. It's a story about an abusive relationship and how it applies to the commitment and consistency. He also tells a story about using this in the Korean War. The communists and Koreans used commitment and consistency to kind of brainwash the American soldiers and the soldiers and the POWs. And what they would do is they would get them to make just little positive statements about the Communist Party or little teeny tiny negative statements about the US, about democracy. And it would start just really, really small. And then they would ask another kind of leading question that led them down to, so something like, just tell us one little thing about America. America is not perfect, right? Well, of course, America is not perfect. They would say, well, just tell us one little way that America is not perfect. Then they would get them to tell them that one way. And then over time, they would get them to go a little bit deeper. And then they would get them to write it down. And then they would get it to write it down and send it back to their families back home. Or they would read it over the PA announcement. They would say, Matt Sellhorst said this about America, and then they would read it. They would print it in the newspapers that were in the camps, that everybody in the camps, the Americans, got to read. And they found that little bit, that kind of just that little window of America's not perfect, got them to convert people and actually change the minds of people so that when they got released, that they were pro-communist in some cases. Now, it doesn't work every time, but that's a commitment and consistency, because once you make the commitment that America's not perfect, and then you kind of pile on with some other little things, well, guess what? Now you can't, to be consistent with what you've said, what you've written, what other people have heard. Well, now you need to hold true to that, and you almost make yourself believe it, because you have to be congruent with your statements, and that's the commitment and consistency. There's also a story he talks about abusive relationships and how that can go down that path. But I think the way they used it in Korea, and that brainwashing concept, really gets it across. So how does that apply to the boating world? Well, it applies to the boating world in, if you're making a sales presentation, one of the things you can do is, if you're going head to head with another manufacturer and you seem like you're on the defensive side, they already like that manufacturer. Maybe it's well entrenched, and you're newer to you're not as well entrenched in your market area, or they have a more a larger dealership and you're a newer dealership, or it's a newer brand in that segment, whatever the case may be, you're on that defensive in the sales position. You can say, well, is there anything that you don't like about their boat? Anything that you would change? And you just start that little, of course there's going to be something. No boat's perfect. They're going to open that little bit of a window. Anything that you would change about that? Okay, tell me a little bit more about that. And then you can kind of crack that door open, and then you can flip and say, hey, is there anything positive? What do you like most about ours? So on their side, you ask about what would you change, what don't you like. On your side, you ask what do you like the most, and then you start flipping the tides, and you get them kind of selling themselves, not by selling hard, but by getting them to state what they like, what they don't like, them to talk about the competition in a negative way based on what their perceptions. And now you start that commitment and consistency, so you can go back to that and reference it. Hey, you talked about, you didn't really care about the layout of that one, and you really liked the helm on ours. You liked how sleek and great it looked. And now you can open yourself to that opportunity, and you're using kind of, I'll call it manipulation. And it's something that Jocko Willink talks about in his podcast, when he talks about oh shoot, I forgot what book he was reviewing, but he talks about manipulation and how he uses that in his leadership consulting practice now. Him and one of his subordinates, when they retired, started this leadership academy. And this is a book that I recently bought called the Extreme Ownership. So that may be one that we review on here in the future. But he talks about using manipulation from a leadership standpoint that a lot of people kind of pull back and they cringe when you hear the word manipulation, but that's exactly what sales is. That's what persuasion is. That's what leadership is to get people to do that they wouldn't normally do on their own. And to do that, you need to manipulate them. Now, you manipulate them in a positive way that's good for them, so it's honest and ethical. But that manipulation is something that I feel is key to the success. And this commitment and consistency concept kind of may feel like manipulation, but when you're doing it for a good reason, when you're doing it for something that's going to be a positive decision, you know that your customer, this is the right boat, you are the right dealership, they can fit it into their budget, it makes sense for their family. Well, it's for a positive purpose because you know the impact this boat's going to have on their life in our in our world. You know the positive influence that doing the proper maintenance on their boat is going to do. So you need to, they're not going to do it on their own. We know that. So you've got to manipulate them, and using this commitment and consistency principle can get you there. So the research study that they did was actually, again, it goes back to a charity, but they were doing fundraising, which were selling, I want to say, cookies or chocolate bars in the Dallas, Texas area. And it was what they would do. It was a hunger relief committee. They did another one with the American Cancer Society, but the one in Dallas was the hunger relief committee, and their phone call was orchestrated. They got them to make a commitment, and then they had to follow through and be consistent with that commitment. So here's what they did: they would call in. Remember, this is 84. People didn't have cell phones. They were answering their phones. Didn't have caller ID, so it didn't matter what number it came from. They would telemarket. There were no do not call lists. And so they would call and they would say, one of the questions they would ask is, how are you feeling tonight? Oh, I'm feeling great, doing well. And then that would lead them to the next question, which is, there are a lot of people that are starving in this world. There's a lot of people that have bad things happening to them. We're going to be in the area. We would love it if you would support the Hunger Relief Committee and buy some of these cookies. Can we get you to do that? Yeah, absolutely. There's less attachment to future money as well. That's not in the book. That's just another thing that I know and that I've used. It's why monthly payments are valuable. To get somebody to part with 100 grand to buy a boat may be difficult, but for $800 a month, yeah, that sounds like a great deal because it's future money, and it fits in their budget better. So back to the book. What they found is there was an 89% increase in the percentage, the number of cookies that were purchased when they used that pre-call, how are you feeling conversation. Ask them to buy the cookies. Hey, we're going to be in your neighborhood in a couple of weeks. Would you be willing to buy a cookie? Yes, we would. They go to that neighborhood, and the people they called bought 89% more cookies than the people that they called and didn't use that. How are you feeling? Would you buy a cookie? So it's that commitment and consistency, and they did this experiment over and over and over. And it's very interesting to me that most of these compliance techniques, if you want to call them that, are minor. They're little tiny things. And that's why in the Splash system, I teach some very specific scripting around different pieces like presenting price, asking for the sale, greeting people at the front door in the dealership. They're scripted very specifically because slight variations matter. Matter of fact, in the introduction, Dr. Cialdini says something about one word can make or break the success of one of these compliance tests. It can be the difference between an 89% increase or 89% compliance in buying cookies versus the other. So that was a very interesting chapter, and I've read this book multiple times. So this is dog-eared and highlighted, and it's very interesting to see it from a research perspective, and then trying to apply it to us in the boating world. They do another study that talks about child rearing and getting kids, especially younger children, to not just behave based on if you don't, you're going to get a spanking kind of thing. If you don't, there's going to be consequences, to get them to not only behave when they're immediately being supervised, but to get their mind around the I'm doing this because I want to, that commitment and consistency. And that's a very interesting chapter as a father of a 4.5-year-old and a 7-year old. It's very interesting. If you have kids, that chapter on commitment and consistency will be very appealing to you. There's a little piece that I think you'll get some good value out. The next one is social proof. Again, if you've heard me speak from the stage, you've likely heard me talk about social proof at some point. Now, social proof, the one of the stories, and I use it right out of the book, when I spoke down at Marine Dealer Conference and Expo a couple years ago, was the use of canned laughter. If you watch TV shows, I'm currently watching a Netflix show called The Ranch with Sam Elliott and Ashton Kutcher, Deborah Winger. There's been some big cameos on there as well, but it's a decent show, and it's about a ranch family in Montana or Wyoming or somewhere like that. But it has a very pronounced laugh track. If you don't know what a laugh track is, it's when if you watch a sitcom or something, they will tell a little joke and then you hear the laughter of the crowd. Even though it's not filmed in front of a crowd, it's piped in, and you can tell it's piped in. But the reason they do that is because it's been proven by ratings that shows with a laugh track perform better than shows without a laugh track. And it's getting that click whir type reaction of, oh, other people are laughing, so therefore it must be funny, I'm going to laugh. And I find myself, because I'm aware of this, as the laugh track goes, I'll catch myself laughing at something that I'm like, that wasn't that funny. And it's that, even though you're aware of it, that click whir reaction of social proof that other people are doing it, so that must be the right reaction, is a very powerful technique. One that you'll, if you've heard me speak, you know where I'm going with this. But they also talk about in this book some research studies about getting people the compliance based on what other people are doing. So they say it works best based on the research in situations where there's confusion or there's unknown. That is very prominent in the boating industry. People that are buying boats, there's a lot of confusion. There's so many brands, there's so many options, there's so many motor choices, there's so much conflicting information out there. Every boating buddy has a different opinion. Is it Yamaha or Mercury the best, or Suzuki or Evinrude, two-stroke, four-stroke, inboard, stern drive, outboard? What's the way to go? Pontoon, fiberglass, V-hull, catamaran. All of these different choices are out there, and there's a lot of confusion because, especially first time boat buyers, but even that person buying their second, third, fourth, and fifth boat, is they may know boating, but there are things that are constantly changing. There are things that may change in their lifestyle that would change the type of boat that's right for them, and they're aware enough to know that they don't know everything, and so there's confusion. So what do? They go to social proof and they look, what's everybody else doing? What else is on the dock? They talk to their boating friends. They're not going to talk to the salesperson unless they have a really rock solid relationship with somebody, because the key to social proof is somebody that is an unrelated third party. And the bigger the group, the more influence. The more like the individual that's shopping, the better, and the more influence is to be had. They've done research based on they did a wallet research where in New York they put a wallet with some money in it, a check in it, and it was in an envelope, and the envelope said something to the effect of, I found this wallet. I'm returning it to you. Hopefully it gets to you properly, and I thank you. And they wrote one in just plain English like that, and they wrote one in kind of broken English, and it said, I just moved to this country a couple of weeks ago. And what they found was that the broken English one got returned. Somebody picked it up and said, oh, 30% of the time they put it in the mailbox and mailed it to the person that lost it. Again, 1984, that's how you return things. You didn't put it on Facebook. You actually just mailed it to the person based on their driver's license. When it was an American that found it, and it was written in good English, 70 some percent of the time it got returned. So over double when The social proof was somebody else is already returning this. The somebody else is like us, 30%. The somebody else is not like us, 30%. The somebody else is like me, 70% compliance on that experiment. So what that tells me is when you're using social proof, and in our world, social proof now is Google reviews, Facebook reviews, testimonials, pictures on social media, delivery photos, pictures around your showroom, pictures of people using their boat. All of those things are social proof. When those pictures look, sound, and are similar to your prospect, the more influence they're going to have. And social proof is such a basic foundation of the splash system and should be such a basic foundation of your sales and marketing strategy, that it should just be a common occurrence to get testimonials and ask for those Google reviews every single opportunity you have, because the other piece of it is the more the more influence it has. So the more social proof there is, the more people see doing the same thing, the more likely it is to influence other folks. So I call it a preponderance of proof when I talk about testimonials. Don't just have 10 Google reviews, have 100. Don't just have 100 Google reviews, strive for 1,000. Same thing with Facebook, and same thing with photos and things like that. But that social proof piece, it's not just a theory that I have, it's a proven scientific psychological fact that what others do influences what people do, what individuals do. So what groups of people do influence what an individual person will do, and it's been proven over and over and over. The wall experience experiment is one that shows the more like the prospect, the more likely it's going to influence. So that means, hey, if you have a diverse culture in your area, that you need to get, especially the ones from the more diverse people. If you don't have very many diverse clients, well, any chance that you have one, make sure that you get a testimonial and you get a photo and a video that you can use, because that will beget more of a diverse community, and give you a more stable business, and expand the boating lifestyle into a more diverse culture, which is gonna impact your business positively, impact the industry positively, and it's a proven piece to the influence puzzle. So there's a story on suicide and auto crashes and plane crashes, a connection between publicly pronounced deaths, suicide murders, and the increase in the correlated increase in deaths by suicide, number of suicides, and murder suicides. It's a fascinating part of the book. It's really complicated to get into the statistics, but if you grab the book, you'll like that part of it. It's the negative aspect of social proof, but something you need to be aware of as well. Something that when I read it, I constantly go back to school gun violence. That the more the media portrays it, the more impact and the more likely we're going to see more occurrences of it, and something that this isn't a gun conversation, but something that you'll probably make a similar connection and have your own opinion there. So the next chapter, liking. We all kind of have heard. Matter of fact, I did a podcast, or I did a Boat Dealer Profits TV video on this. The liking factor, no like and trust. We've heard it in every sales training we've ever been in. Every sales manager has talked about it. Every sales book has beat it to death. In this, they talk about it in terms of definitely using that to your advantage, but orchestrating ways to get people to like you. And again, very manipulative, yes, but when you do it in a honest and ethical way, in a way that the end result is going to be good for the person, and done in a sincere way. I think in this case, a very sincere way is kind of a overlying must be there kind of thing. Otherwise, the liking won't happen, and they'll see right through what's going on. And so there's got to be that sincerity as well. But he opens it with Tupperware. Now, Tupperware at one point, he references in the book, was doing sales of over $2.5 million a day. Now, they were one of the first home party direct sales kind of businesses that I'm aware of that really took off. It started by a company that was really struggling from the other books I've read that talk about the Tupperware business model. Very a very struggling company because their product was more expensive, sitting on the retail shelves. Nobody could differentiate it, and why would I pay $5 for this bowl when I can get this bowl for $1? And nobody could demonstrate it. There was no reason to buy it in the consumer's mind, so it was just a flop. Then they came up with the home party where the ladies in the neighborhood would have a party, invite all their friends. The Tupperware rep would do the demonstration, but it wasn't the Tupperware rep that asked you to buy. It was the party host, the friend that asked you to buy because there was this liking piece there. There was also some reciprocation. You got invited to a party. It wasn't just a here, let me sell you some Tupperware. There was drinks and conversation and hors d'oeuvres and probably some raffle prizes and things like that. So that set up the reciprocation. That there was some social proof because the person that you liked that's hosting the party probably also owned some Tupperware, and she told her story of why it was so great. So there was that social proof there. There was a lot of similarities, so that social proof was even more powerful. If there were multiple ladies at the party that had a piece of Tupperware that they really liked, then that added to the preponderance of proof, and there was almost an obligation then to buy, and it really turned the Tupperware company around. Again, $2.5 million in sales a day of little plastic bowls and doodads. So that liking principle is very, very important. And it's that click word type reaction. When I like somebody and they ask me to do something, there's that compliance factor of, oh, I like this person. I'm going to be more likely to do it. My tape recorder says to do what they ask because I like them and don't put as much thought into it. You may have also heard of Joe Girard. He is the Guinness Book of World Record for selling the most cars in a year, the greatest salesman according to the Guinness Book of World Records. He worked at a Chevy dealership, and he's famous. If you've read his book, the greatest, what is it, the greatest salesman? I've got it on my bookshelf somewhere. The greatest salesman of all time, or something like that, is famous for sending a card every month to everybody in his database, 13,000 people, that just said it was like, Happy New Year, Happy 4th of July, Happy Memorial Day, whatever it is. And on the inside, it would say, I like you. Signed, Joe Girard, and that was it. Every month he sent it, and he based a lot of he contributed a lot of his success to that simple system with that simple message. Because if I like you, you're more likely to like me back because it's, I don't know if it's reciprocation or not, but there's that like factor that we all know to be true, and that was one of his strategies, and it was based on I like you, you like me, and then the reaction to any compliance request is much greater. So in the studies on this one, they talked about the studies of they talked about the studies of let's see, I'm trying to find the right section of the book. I've got everything um, in here. The study goes into how when they set up the study for people to like somebody and not like somebody, the compliance amount went up by, I want to say it was like 2 or 3 times, but I'm having a hard time finding my highlighted notes here. So it's one of those things that the liking factor we all know is there. We don't really need a lot of scientific research to back it up, but in the book again, you will find that you will find that to be the case. It was a sports related study. So the next one we're going to move to is authority. Again, if you've heard me speak multiple presentations, I talk about the use of authority and changing yourself from being a simple sales. I say simple salesperson because we know it's not a simple job, and I have great respect for the profession, but the general public does not see a salesperson as an authority. They see the salesperson as a fast talking. In my presentation, I talk about a Herb Tarlick type person versus an authority, which is Dr. Oz. If you don't know Herb Tarlick, in the 70s, there was a TV show called WKRP in Cincinnati. Herb Tarlick was the salesperson at the radio station selling advertising and, plaid suit, gold chains, fast talker, promising everything, very seldom delivering, the prototypical salesperson. Dr. Oz, on the other hand, is the authority. Doctor, it's even in his title, white lab coat, very professional, very clean cut, looks the part. Just right out of the gate, if one of those gave you a recommendation, which one are you going to be more compliant with? Well, it's very simple. It's going to be Dr. Oz, because he has the authority. He also has some celebrity built in, which is these days, in the age of Kardashians and reality TV and social media and influencers, create credibility and authority go together consistently. But the study they did on this one, he starts talking about what was it called, the Milgram experiments, which they did, and it was the experiment where they had a subject that was behind the glass that was supposed to be answering questions. For everyone they got right, they got a pass. For everyone they got wrong, they got a shock of electricity. Started at like 5 volts, and in the experiment went up to 400 volts. Um, on the doctor end of the glass was the study participant, to see how they reacted, and would they press the button to give the voltage. What they discovered was, much to everybody's surprise, is that the participants were pushing the button up to the very top end at like a 70% clip. So the compliance rate was incredibly high. Actually, I take that back. It was 93% in the initial experiment. Blew them away. Nobody thought that was going to be what happened. And what their hypothesis was of why that happened was because the boss, the person of authority in a white lab coat, a clipboard, was saying, press the button. No, I know you don't want to, but you need to press the button, and they would reluctantly press the button all the way up to what would kill a person. Obviously, the person behind the screen was an actor, and they weren't actually hooked up to electricity, but a very famous psychological experiment. If you've ever taken a psychology class, you probably have read about it. But what they found, they did another experiment, and they said, well, maybe they didn't realize that level of electricity would be deadly. Maybe they just didn't know. So they changed it, and the actor that was receiving the shocks would say, "I have a heart condition. I can feel my heart. It's feeling funny. It's not beating properly." And that's where it was a 70+% compliance, even in that situation. And it's all attributed to the authority, to the boss. So in the example he gives, he talks about Dr. Welby. Doctor, was it Marcus Welby, MD? I think a TV doctor on TV. I remember my dad used to call our next door neighbor that, Marcus Welby, MD. His name was Mark, but I think a TV character, so not even a real doctor, increased the sales of Sanka, a coffee brand, because he recommended it. Sanka, the 100% real coffee that lets you be your best, and he was the celebrity spokesperson. There was credibility and there was authority because he played a doctor on TV. So that authority umbrella, it doesn't even have to be totally earned, like being an actual doctor. You can just have the image of a doctor. You play one on TV. Well, that's good enough for me. The Holiday Express commercial. I stayed at a Holiday Express last night. Well, that's good enough. You must know what's going on. The look, in subsequent studies, they did not even a real doctor, but just somebody that wore a lab coat and had a clipboard. They've done other studies where it was just a clipboard, and that gave the influence, that gave the increase of compliance because they held that authority position. Again, how does it translate to the boating industry? Well, how can you change yourself from just a salesperson to an authority in the business? Well, part of it is the clothes you wear. Are you matching the clothes of your clients? There, you get some authority with that. You get some credibility with that. Are you looking sharp, well groomed, well presented, clean? And yes, I know it can be difficult when you're working outside and you're on boats and you're swimming and all of that. But what can you do to look the part as best as possible? To have the uniform of authority, to speak as an authority. But what else can you do to give yourself the allure of authority? One is to be an expert, to know the products inside and out, to know the competition inside and out. Writing a book is a way that I've generated authority for myself. Hosting this podcast, doing a Boat Dealer Profits TV episode, being on video everywhere. All of those things add up to increasing your level of authority, which is also going to increase your level of persuasion and influence. And if you notice, a lot of these things, it's not just do one, it's a layering. It's like building a rope. Every time you put a new wrap of twine around, you make that stronger. The influence becomes stronger. So it's not just using authority, but using authority with social proof, using social proof with reciprocity, using reciprocity with commitment and consistency, with liking. All of those, you start adding it up and adding it up, and you by orchestrating everything and not just doing it willy-nilly, by really thinking it through, using some very very select words at certain pieces of the process, by doing some certain things throughout your sales and marketing process, you increase the percentage of compliance. And if you noticed in these studies, there was no study that they did that the compliance was 100%. No study was 100%. But if you increase 30% here, increase 20% there, increase 50% here, what happens is now you've just increased the chance of getting compliance from your prospects, from your current people. Over time, that's going to have a major impact on the profitability, on the stability of your business, because once you get those systems in place and they're working over time, everything else becomes easier and easier and easier. And again, it's not based on the latest trend, what some guru thinks works. This is actually based on true psychology, and that's why it's so powerful. And that leads us to the last one here, and that's scarcity. Scarcity is something that is in sales. We all know it. We get down to our last boat, and all of a sudden we have three people that want it, and it's because it's a scarce product. We always want things that we can't have. And they did a study with 2-year-olds where they placed two toys in a room, and they wanted to see how quickly the kids went and touched each one of them. So that was the end result. One, they placed a 1 foot plexiglass piece between them, and these were 2-year-olds, so they would walk up, they would reach right over, and they would grab the toy that they wanted. What was interesting is the next group of kids, they put a 2 foot piece of plexiglass between them and the toy, and it was the number. Let's see if I can find. Um, when the barrier was too small to restrict the toy behind it, the boys showed no difference in which one they went after. The boys that were directly obstructed to the toy, making contact with it, was 3 times faster than with the unobstructed toy. So when you put the toy, same toy, behind the 2 foot plexiglass wall and it was obstructed, and they had to make a direct attempt to go get that toy, it wasn't easy. They were 3 times faster in going after that toy. It tells you something a little bit about childproofing. If you just leave some stuff out, maybe the kids won't get into it. But when you set it up high, well, that's going to make them want it more. And that starts at 2 years old. So it's ingrained in us. Again, that click whir reaction. Oh, that's scarce. I'm not supposed to have that. I can't have that. I want it even more. It's where exclusive programs, concierge level service, becomes very interesting, because especially with the more affluent one, is there's other attractions to that. But when you say, hey, we can only do 35 of these, we can only have 35 members, there's that scarcity of, if I don't act, I'm going to lose out. That fear of missing out, and that's that scarcity principle in action. It can come with a model that's selling out. I've got some nautique dealers with the G23s. The G23s were limited. Production slots were sold out early. Well, that made those boats a little easier to sell when you use that to your advantage. And you talked about that not only in your sales presentation, but you talked about in your marketing messages as well. And you create that scarcity, in this case, a very real scarcity situation. You can manufacture it at times with the concierge service. You can put a number on it and say, we're not going to do more than this, because if we do, We have to add more staff, and we're not going to add more staff right now. When we get to 35, we may make the decision to do that, but right now we only have room for 35, and then we're going to cut it off for now. That scarcity can be used, and again, play it honestly, play it ethically. Don't just arbitrarily put it in place, and don't lie. Don't put your inventory back in the rig and shop, and don't tell anybody and say, oh, we're out of those. Oh, but we can get one. No, don't play it like that, but play it legit. But that is another influence trigger. So the other piece that he starts off the book with a story about getting compliance in a situation by using the word because. So I want to close with that. They did a study. They did a study with in a college at a Xerox machine, a copy machine, and the study was somebody went up to a line of people at the copy machine. Yes, there used to be lines at the copy machine because it was the only way to duplicate, and that was big time technology back in '84. And they would say, "Excuse me, can I cut to make a copy?" And that got 30, what was it, 32% said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead and cut." Now, they made one slight change to the language and they said, "May I cut because I need to make a copy?" Well, why else would you ask to jump in front of the line at the copy machine? Of course you need to make a copy, but that one change in language, by giving the reason why, that because, increased compliance to 78%. So they over doubled the compliance just by using that one. Actually, I take that back, 93%. "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make some copies?" That got a compliance rate of 93% versus, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" Had a much lower compliance rate. So the reason I say that is, if you're going to use scarcity, if you're going to use some of these techniques, you have to justify it. And a lot of times, just using the word because and then whatever the reason is going to justify it and make the compliance jump up even higher. So that's kind of an overlying one that can be used with any of these. So that's the book Influence by Dr. Cialdini. It's been a national bestseller. His new book is Persuasion. That has some very interesting stories in it, and he adds to it a little bit. I recommend that one as well. That one's written after he has kind of embraced being the sales and marketing guru that he's become within the hardcore in the industry. And that's a great book as well. I've recommended that and gifted that one as well. So I appreciate you listening. If these things that we just talked about kind of got your mind racing and you're interested in having a conversation about, man, maybe there are some things in our dealership that we could do that are going to make a major impact. Maybe we've been using strategies that are somewhat outdated, or could be improved, or we could get better results. Reach out to me. We have a new program kicking off with the Splash system here as the season winds down. In August, we're going to be making the announcement. So if you're interested, you can go to boatdealerprofits.com/success, boatdealerprofits.com/success, and you can request a one-on-one strategy session. And in that strategy session, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you, what are the major challenges in your business? And we're going to talk about those challenges. We're going to talk about, hey, where's the opportunity? Are there some of these strategies that are based in the psychology of how people actually make decisions, how people actually buy things, things that have been proven in the marine industry over and over and over? We're going to see, hey, maybe there's some opportunity in your business. Maybe it makes sense to get involved in the program. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But if we have a conversation, I can promise you it'll be valuable. I can promise you it'll be a good use of your time. You'll come out saying, I've been listening to Matt's podcast. This conversation was directly attributable, directly impactful on my business. It was a half hour very well spent, and it may lead to a major transformation in your business, if that makes sense. So check that out, boatdealerprofits.com/success. Go back and listen to any of the other podcasts, boatdealerprofits.com/podcasts. You can read my boating industry articles. You can check out my Boat Dealer Profits TV at boatdealerprofits.com/TV. And I will see you on the next podcast. Take care.